Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of Craig Houston Talks To podcast. And we're back on the road, as you can see, in the lovely town of Kirkcaldy. And the reason I came to Kirkcaldy will probably be a surprise to a lot of my political viewers who watch my political videos. I'm through here to interview Neale Hanvey, who is the ALBA politician who was in Westminster as an MP up until it closed and is a local candidate to be returned to Westminster. So enjoy the podcast, and here's Neale Hanvey. I'm at the wrong place. So how are you, Neale? Nice to see you again. And how's the campaign trail been for you the last few weeks?
It's been just a bit of a rush, really, because nobody seems to have been expecting the election at the time that it happened. It's been quite an extraordinary few weeks. So getting ourselves organised, getting the campaign planned, being out, meeting voters, delivering leaflets, designing letters and all that kind of stuff. So all the machinery of the campaign has been ongoing. So busy time.
Were you guys just like the rest of society expecting something to happen around about October, November? Is that what your thoughts were with the election?
Well, that was the expected, without question, the expected time, an autumn election, and that's from parliamentary sources, from people that I know in the Conservative Party. That was what everybody was expecting. And on the day that it was called, it was quite interesting, because Stephen Flynn asked Rishi Sunak if he was feared and to call a general election, and later that afternoon he called one. I think nobody was more surprised than Stephen Flynn that happened. But I reached out to people I've done a lot of work over the last 4.5 years with in the Conservative Party to say, were you guys expecting this? And they had no clue, no idea. It was a shock to everybody.
So the nation started hearing wee whispers throughout the afternoon from memory, and then the announcement came at night in the pouring rain. Were you guys as ill-informed as we were at that point? Was it kept that tight?
Absolutely. I couldn't quite believe it. Because there was obviously within the party, we were having WhatsApp chats about what on earth is going on. Is this really happening? And I was still kind of bullish at thinking, there's no way. Not from my own perspective, I just thought from the Conservative Party's perspective, there's no way he's going to call an election now. So what? The inflation's come down, but nobody's felt it. Nobody will believe that that's a thing until the costs and prices and everything comes down. So it was extraordinary, an extraordinarily poorly judged decision.
And were you in Westminster at that day? Were you down in London?
I was back up in the constituency on the day. Kenny was down on that day, and we kind of do a tag team. So we're only there together if it's absolutely necessary for votes. And so I was up here, so I was a bit disconnected, to say the least. It was extraordinary.
Yeah. No, it was fascinating to get an insight into that, because when you're a member of the public and you see the day, unravelling the way it did, I wonder, how did nobody in the press, there was some of the people in the press that were saying, look, I've got great Tory sources, and nobody's seen this coming. They kept it really, really tight. Why do you think they done it?
Well, I can't really speculate. My reading of the situation is that there was an increasing number of letters going into the 1922 committee, casting doubt on the Prime Minister's performance. I think there were certain players in the Conservative Party who thought perhaps we would be better off with a new leader before any general election. I think they've been proven right, because the lack of judgment is just startling. But so I think that possibly Mr. Sunak decided, well, if you're going to stab me in the back, I'm just going to blow the party up. Because that's what he's done. Let's be absolutely honest. That is exactly what he's done to the Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, there's comparisons a lot I see between the Tories in Westminster and the SNP up here, and that's my own personal opinions, that they can't read the room. A lot of the players seem more interested in them than the party even. And some people have this comment, they put the party before the country. I think it's worse than that. I see a lot of politicians in Hollywood that put themselves before the party, before the country, and it's in that order. So it's interesting that they're sort of similar. And then you'd want examples of politicians not reading the room. What he done as recently as at the D-Day celebration / remembrance. You think, and you are absolutely bonkers. And I think where society is just now, I think there's a disconnect from politicians to the members of the public. And when you see things like this, I think it, to me, it just shows that that's correct, that these guys have got no, not all politicians, I don't, put everybody in the same box, or I wouldn't be here today, to be perfectly frank. But when you see that guy doing that and thinking nothing of it, and you go, you can't read the room.
No.
But having the amount of people behind them that these organisations have, PR, advisors and all that, how scary is that?
Well, I mean, I have a very simple kind of analysis of politics since I got involved. My background's in the NHS. I've had a real career, real life, and I think that really helps me do my job as a politician because I'm in tune with the struggles that people face all the time. But there's two principal types of people that I've come across in politics: people who want to do important things and people who just want to feel important. And there's people of that second category throughout politics. And I think that is a real problem. And it's not just the Conservatives, it's not just the SNP, it's rife across the political landscape. And of course, we kind of know already before a vote's been cast that the Labour Party are likely to be the largest party. And I would say they are as out of tune with the general public as anybody else, as any other political party. And so they will have absolutely nowhere to hide if they have a significant majority, because the challenges that they face are absolutely enormous, and the promises that they're making, they can't keep. So, I mean, my kind of pitch in this election is really around the work that I've done as a constituency MP. I've delivered consistently for my constituents with over 12,000 constituency casework cases dealt with, brought in £166,000 of recovered cash for constituents, with the biggest single beneficiary getting £36,000. That kind of thing really makes a difference to people who are suffering from a cost of living crisis and people who are at their wits' end. Because when you come to an MP, you're usually the last door that people will chap on. And so it's really important that you do your very best. And I don't turn any case away. If it's something that is to do with a local council and a councillor might be the person to deal with it, they come to me, so I'll deal with it. Same is true of Scottish parliamentary issues. I will deal with it. And obviously the more complex things like immigration and visas and the like, which we're allowed to deal with, I wouldn't turn anybody away in that.
I think we've obviously got polar differences in opinions on independence, right? Yes. That's obvious because you're an ALBA politician and you've seen my videos. I'm a Unionist and that. But through talking to you previously when I met you last week at the event, a couple of times electronically, there's a lot of your social views that I share, and I've got this. If I could do one thing, you get a dream thing that you can do once. That would to have one election where people don't vote for a rosette, and we ban party politics. And we make the guys that want to go and represent us at Westminster tell us what they're going to do. Now, if we had that type of politics, I think because of your previous 4 or 5 years representing this constituency, you would be a shoo-in. Because there's what I've done, people know you, and you've done well for the area. However, we don't live in that utopia. We live in a reality that is very party politically driven, and people do vote on the rosette. Yeah. How do you think that's going to affect you at this election, if at all?
Well, I mean, it will obviously have an impact. There's two types. There are people who are absolutely committed to a political party, and there are people who are habitual voters. And so they don't, I'm not being dismissive of them at all, they don't really pay attention to the nitty-gritty of politics. So they're not maybe have their finger completely on the pulse, but they agree with the general thrust of what that party stands for. The difficulty in this election is that most of the parties' general thrust is not being adhered to. So if you're voting for a Labour Party because you believe in social justice or socialism or those types of policies, then you'll be disappointed because the Labour Party are a right of centre party at the moment. I mean, they make Tony Blair look positively socialist in some respects. And if you're voting for the SNP in the hope that they'll be pursuing independence, then again, you'll be deeply disappointed because they've removed it from their ballot papers. It's not part of their campaign. It'll be in their manifesto, but you know, the SNP over the last 10 years have been very good at wheeling independence out in advance of an election, only to let people down time and time and time again with their promises. And you know, the Green Party, they're not really interested in the environment. They're completely obsessed with gender politics. And so, you know, you can go through that list again and again and again. And, you know, if you think you're voting for a principle based on the rosette, then you'll be disappointed. And I would hope that many people will take a step back and say, what a mess politics is in, because I agree with them. And I'm going to vote for somebody who actually does the job that we're asking them to do, and does it, you know, diligently and with a lot of energy. It's quite interesting. I was out yesterday leafleting, and you know, you chat to folk when you're out doing things like leafleting just as well as chatting doors. And two people, one after the other, two couples actually. One of them, the guy came out and he said, "No, the SNP, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, the SNP have completely abandoned Scotland. And that's the mood. These are people who normally vote SNP who refuse to do it. So they'll either stay at home and not vote, or they'll be mobilised to come and vote for myself and the ALBA party because we are true to that ambition, you know, whether you agree with that or not. And then the next couple, the guy, I was just walking up to them and said, "Oh, I've got a leaflet, give it to you because they're out in the garden." And he said, "You Neale?" And I said, "He said, done great work for us. He's done great work, definitely getting our vote." Now, I have no idea what their political views are or whether they support independence or not, but I think that tells its own story, and that's genuine, absolutely true facts from yesterday.
Yeah, I think, as I say, my utopia would be at a general election. Yeah. The true heart of it is sending someone down to Westminster to represent a particular area. Yeah. In my whole adult life, I have never had a candidate of any party ask me for their vote. Right. Never once. And you have that option just now, but it'd be a wasted option because I live in Glasgow. But yeah, so, you know, I was born and brought up in Linwood, which that place was, you know, the Proclaimers made famous with their song Linwood No More. I lived through that. We then moved a wee bit posher up to Bridge of Weir, which was a sort of Blue Rins area. I then moved into Glasgow when I was married. And each area I've lived in has been a shoe-in for whatever candidate. And that, you know, it's just that party's changed through time. So that's maybe something to do with it. But it disappoints me because what we're actually doing is sending somebody down to Westminster to represent our community. And if they don't go and talk to the community, how do you know what you're voting for other than the colour of the rosette? And that saddens me. So it's heartening to hear you're actually going to, you know, there's not somebody else just going out and delivering leaflets for you and you're talking to the community. But I think if people are true to my hopes and my theory and the way people should vote, then that should be your constituency because you're the guy that's delivered X, Y, and Z. But looking back at the election that got you in, how did the votes, what was the sort of spread of them? Who was the second place and how big a majority did you have back then?
Well, it's not a massive majority, it's just over 1,200. And second place was Labour, and Leslie Laird, who at that time was the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland. So it was quite a big deal. I mean, I think that the result could have been very different. I mean, it was not exactly the most straightforward path to Westminster the last time, with my own party attacking me, and then, you know, walking away from the competition. So, you know, the SNP have absolutely no claim on my election. They withdrew from that election, and so no matter what people say, that's just a basic fact. And the reason that I continued in that election was really because I had, by standing as a candidate, given a commitment to the constituency to be the standard bearer for independence in that election. And I wasn't going to be the one that denied them the opportunity to express that democratic vote. And so that's why I continued and why I won. But there is it's going to be a particularly tightly fought race this time because, of course, I've got an SNP candidate, a Labour Party candidate, and myself all vying for support. So, but I'm not going to walk away from that commitment, and I'm not going to walk away from a seat that I would like to hold. So I'll continue my campaign. But it's interesting, the SNP candidate is really struggling because of the SNP's record in the Scottish Parliament, and certainly at a recent hustings really was not able to present a coherent argument about some of the dreadful things that are happening as a consequence of that mismanagement of poor governance. And of course, the Labour Party candidate has been flown in from London, somebody who lives in London, that Keir Starmer's back in, and we've lost two potential local candidates. One because the trolls went after their social media account and dragged them through the media, and I've got great sympathy for the candidate who had to go through that. It's a very unpleasant experience. And then the other candidate, which I really can't understand. So Julie McDougall, she's a local councillor, was a Labour councillor until last week. A very, very personable, capable local councillor, lots of local support from the constituency Labour Party, and has been, for some reason, blocked and ended up resigning from the Labour Party last week. And that, that kind of speaks to a narrative that's playing out in lots of different political parties. So in the Labour Party, you've got, people like Julie being stabbed in the back, Diane Abbott being attempted to be stabbed in the back, Rosie Duffield being undermined. You've got experiences like myself, Joan McAlpine, Joanna Cherry, all being attacked from the inside of the SNP. And then you've got the stuff that's happened with David Duckett and Douglas Ross this week, where the party have turned against their own. And I just think that puts people off politics. It's like, if they can't, if politicians can't be civil to each other within their own parties, what hope is there that they're going to actually be considerate of the electorate and work in their best interests? It all feels very self-absorbed and goes back to that point I was making about, doing important things or feeling important. What's your priority?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a horrible theatre to watch sometimes. I mean, I sometimes laugh at the sort of comedy value of Westminster. I think that makes me laugh sometimes. Was just a bit childish, to be honest with you. But a lot of that's a traditional stuff in the way they have to voice opinions and stuff. But one of the things that made me laugh when we changed, again, the First Minister, the week before it, all the opposition were having a pop at Humza. Mm-hmm. And he turned round and he spoke to Alex Cole-Hamilton and basically said to him, "You're only representing four seats here. Who do you think you're talking to?" Now, that was not verbatim, but it was well saying that. And he thought, "You are totally disingenuous to that guy." And then he gets heaved. Then, because obviously they've been the Greens. Swinney comes in and he's now in a minority government, so he's needing some pals at no more important time when he tries to get a budget through. Yeah. So he's trying to appease everyone now and says how we've now, 5 days later, we've got to start being nice to each other and show respect. And you think, but when your party was the majority, your predecessor standing there slaughtering the guy, how dare you talk to me and ask me questions when you've only got 4 seats? They would love those 4 seats now. So I think the theatre of the whole of politics is played out quite abysmally sometimes, and it can put the public off. And I think that can sometimes be led by complacency. People been in positions for too long, like 17 years at Holyrood, 14 years at Westminster. Yeah. And I think the whole thing needs changing. And I think Westminster's harder to change because of first past the post. But if we want to change any parliament, it's probably Holyrood would be the easiest because of regional votes and things like that. And I would love to see a Scottish parliament where we don't have a majority and we either have a minority that need friends or a coalition, because then we don't have such polar things going through and these bun fights maybe don't exist. And I would love just a 5-year term at Holyrood where, with all due respect to yourself, and I know your politics, my biggest problem with Holyrood over the last 17 years is the only thing we want to talk about is independence. And if we can't talk about independence, we'll tie independence to any argument. If it goes wrong, we blame Westminster, Brexit or Tories, when that might not be the case. And I would love just the big boy pants on for 5 years with a government that says, do you know what? We might talk about this because it's a subject worth talking about, but it's not going to be front and centre. And we're just going to sort Scotland out with this book of devolution. That's the rules we've got. So let's just govern the country 5 years, try and control the mess, and see where that leads in 5 or 10 years. And if there's still an appetite for independence with a government that's run properly, then we could bring it up again. And that's what I see the biggest issue with Holyrood. What's your feelings as a guy who is looking at it from a different side? You're looking at it from a desire for independence, but how do you see Holyrood having served you?
Well, so what I would say is what you've just outlined is exactly what Alex Salmond did between 2007 and 11. So Alec governed with consensus. He made agreements with parties across the chamber to advance policies that benefited the people of Scotland. That was his raison d'etre in that time, and he had to do that because he was in a minority government, and he was able to do that through consensus building, and because he had to, no other choice. And then, of course, he was rewarded with, something that shouldn't happen, which is a majority in the proportional system that exists there. So that proportional system is supposed to deliver exactly the type of parliament that that Alec did all of that in between 2007 and 11. And you have to remember that, when he took office in 2007, that was just before the financial crisis. But he still managed to achieve a whole lot of stuff. And so I break down the SNP's terms in office into two halves. There's the Alex Salmond half and the Nicola Sturgeon half. The first half, I would say, and there's a long list of achievements that the SNP still hold up and say are their achievements from that first half. And the second half has been winding down most of those achievements. And that is why things are in a bit of a mess, because there hasn't been the same commitment to consensus building. There has been a blind obsession with divisive politics. And I'm more focusing on gender ideology as the core of that. And I know that we all have a different opinion about whether independence is divisive or not. I think that the reason the independence issue has been divisive is not because the Constitution is, well, obviously we'll have different opinions, but it's not because that is a divisive issue per se. It's because under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, all the SNP did do was talk about independence. They didn't do anything about it. And so that kind of got under the skin of everybody. So it got under the skin of people who support a continuation of the Union, because that was all they were hearing. And it got under the skin of the independence movement. There's a question going about just now about, aren't people who support independence sick of being marched up at the top of the hill only to be marched back down again? I don't think that's an accurate way to put it. They've been marched up to the top of the hill and let down again and again and again, and not by anybody else, but by a sequence of leaders of the SNP. And John Swinney's just, continuing that pattern. So it's been frustrating for all of us, and it's been divisive because it's just been a constant sound there. It's never progressed to any meaningful discussion.
Yeah, I mean, my politics, but you also know with watching the stuff that I do, I try to look at both sides at any point as much as be fair as possible. And I think if I was a nationalist, I'd be nothing but disappointed with SNP. Because, and I say it often, I think they have ruined the country for Unionists, but that can be for everyone. But they've ruined the independence dreams for nationalists. And my view on it was that 2 years ago, when Nicola was down at the London courts trying to force through in Westminster,
Supreme Court.
Yeah. So when that got knocked in the head, she came out, and her route to independence at that point was immediately, we're going to have a de facto referendum at the next Westminster election. we will win that if we get 50% plus one vote, and that will give us a mandate for independence, right? Stroke referendum, whatever way you wanted to do it. And I thought, as a unionist at that point, I thought, oh God, that could, that would make sense. If that was to happen, then I looked at the figures, and the probability of it happening was quite low. So then Humza gets up, and he gets up at the conference, I believe, which would have been autumn last year. Yeah. And his route to independence was, no, we're not going to do that because it was unachievable. We will, if we win half of the seats, that will give me a mandate to go to Westminster and demand a referendum. And I'm looking at the sums and I'm thinking, you could do that with 30 to 39% of the vote. So let's say you get 35% of the vote, you get 29 or 30 seats, that's half the seats. You're going to then go to Westminster and demand a referendum. Why would anybody agree to that if you've only got a third of the vote? So that route, although people might buy into that, it's unmanageable because the people that you need to get the agreement from aren't going to buy your offer. Yep. Now, it was interesting that it took almost a week, 10 days into the election campaign before anybody asked Swinney what his route was going to be. And he's just said, well, the 30 seats, the 29 seats, which, one, it looks as if it's not going to happen. And two, even if it did happen, why would anybody agree that that was a mandate for a referendum with a third of the votes? So, as a nationalist, what are they buying into now?
Well, I mean, there isn't a strategy is the bottom line. There isn't a coherent strategy. And, you can't short circuit. There's lots of people in the national movement who, invoke things like the Claim of Right, which is a very important document because it underpins our common law, and it is something that the monarch does sign up to. So it's a real thing. So there are important aspects and strands to the case for sovereignty, return of sovereignty. But what you can't do, I mean, you just can't say that we're going to claim a right for X, Y, or Z without a robust democratic mandate, because it's not about what I think, and it's not about what Westminster thinks or you think. It's about how you demonstrate to the world that you've made your claim for statehood. That's the fundamental question you have to answer. And so in response to the UK Supreme Court, I put together a private member's bill called Scotland Self-Determination Bill, and that replicates the provisions that are in the Northern Ireland Act for Scotland. So pretty straightforward, balancing of an equal opportunity across different parts of the UK, which is something that the UK should do as the state. I mean, they should recognise that. And so that, I think, is, it doesn't favour one side or the other, it just provides a mechanism. It relies on a democratic force to make that happen. So there has to be a preponderance of support. And that was backed up, that work that I did was backed up by a legal opinion that I obtained from Professor Robert McCorquodale, who's an international legal expert and does work for the UN. And great guy, very astute academic. And, there's a really important point in his opinion that's really clear, that the decision on self-determination is for the people to decide, not for the state. So there's the need to find a mechanism that recognises the right of the people to make a decision on their constitutional future. That's just a fundamental right. That's not about politics or anything else. That's just a fundamental philosophical right of peoples. And so there needs to be a mechanism that allows that. But by saying, and if you get support for the prospectus to be independent, then the international community would recognise that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They've done it many, many times before. Most countries who've become independent, particularly from the UK, have done so through an election rather than a referendum. Referendums completely unnecessary. And if the UK government won't grant one, then an election is the vehicle to do that. That's our position. But to say that, I think this majority of seats thing tracks back to comments that Margaret Thatcher made in her time as Premier. that, you know, if the Scottish Nationalists want independence, all they have to do is send a majority of seats. Now, okay, that's politics. And she did say that, and there's a valid argument for that. But in terms of democratic force, I think you'd be hard pressed to make the case to the international community if you didn't have more than 50%. I just, you know, that's just a reality, because however much I want independence, my wishes can't overrule other people's. It has to be something that we've all settled on. Now, it is the balance is 50-50, and of course the contentious bit is change, and that's.
I heard that same sum from Alex Salmond a couple of days ago, because I became quite a fan of Alex Salmond. I've heard that with you. I think he's given great value just now in some of the ways he comments, and I would disagree with the 50-50 because I don't know how we get that. I think it's close to 50-50, right? But and if the real figure was the same as it was in 2014 and it was 55-45 in favour of the status quo, I can understand why the ALBA party would use 50-50. So it's just a number, right? But you're right. And if Hum's reality, or Hum's wish was to happen, if Swinney's wish was to happen, and the SNP were to get 30 seats with 35% of the vote, for example, what does that mean to the other 65% that didn't vote them? Have we just to accept it? And I think that's where the anger and the frustration comes in from unionists. And I use the word unionist because it's not just unionists. There'll be people who just prefer the status quo because they're not sure what the alternative is. So for them, just to say, well, that's it. What do we do with this other 65%? It doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, it's a bigger problem than that, really, to be honest, Craig, because the reason that the previous election or the previous referendum was successful, and I mean in broadest terms, so independence went from the mid-20s up to 45%. So that was a successful campaign, and it's been sustained, that support. It's not drifted away. In fact, it has grown by quite a few percentage points. But the reason that was successful, and I go back to the point I was making earlier, is because Alec gave people a degree of confidence that Scotland could be an independent country. Whether you agreed with it or not, people generally respected the work that he did, and they thought he thought, I've canvassed lots of people who are not supporters of independence, but who voted for the SNP during those days because of Alec's ability to govern. And you can't doubt that. What you will find incredibly difficult, though, is to win an argument about self-determination when the party that's advocating it are doing a really bad job across a whole range of important policy areas, or their integrity and transparency is in question. And so, I get John Swinney having a dig at Douglas Ross because of his expenses thing, and it's a bit of a retaliation for the Michael Matheson stuff. But when you've gone along with what Michael Matheson did, you're not really in a strong position to start throwing stones at anybody.
No, and again, that to me frustrates me because I don't like the SNP and their governing Scotland, but it's something that isn't unique to the SNP, if I'm perfectly honest with you. This sort of double standards that you see, and I would like to see the whole political spectrum buy into a sort of cleaner way of politicising stuff. That's probably impossible to happen, right enough, because that's all we do. But see when the referendum was happening, you in the health service at the time, or were you involved in politics?
So I had a period of ill health between 2008 and 2011. So I came back up from London. I was working down there. I was quite poorly. Came back up here to recover, and then when I was through my recovery, I got involved in Scottish politics. So I Labour voter until Tony Blair, and because I was down in London for many years, and I really, when I got back to Scotland in 2009, I could feel the difference in the way people carried themselves and their confidence with the in the early days of the Parliament. It felt different, and so I was very enthusiastic about that. I thought, because I could see, it's a bit like, you haven't seen anybody for ages, you can see all the changes in them. It felt like that for me. I could really see a great change in the country in a really positive way. And when the Conservatives got back into power, I guess, my younger years were jaded with the Conservative administration under Margaret Thatcher and the damage that I witnessed across Fife as the pits closed and people lost jobs and industry was removed from Scotland. So I was very cynical and jaded by that, to say the least. And so I just kind of had an epiphany and thought, we need to be an independent country. Then we get the governments that we vote for. And so it was from a very pragmatic perspective, that I made that decision. And from that moment forward, I've been determined to get independence, not for its own sake, but because I really believe that's the way we make life better for the majority of people in Scotland. So it's a real belief that it is better as far as I'm concerned.
Were you involved in the sort of run up to the referendum? What capacity, 2012 to 14?
So I was elected as a councillor in 2012, and at that time I was the organiser for the SNP in the Dunfermline branch, and so I was a central part of the team that put together the referendum campaign in that area. We were organised in 4 broad teams across Fife. I led that team there with great help from various other folk. A couple of guys called Brian Kelly and others, and they did a tremendous piece of work. But we started off, we were putting. I remember Brian put on a coffee morning in one of the local community centres. There was about 5 or 6 people turned up. This is right at the beginning, and it was a mountain to climb. And then there was a few more people came, we had a few more meetings, and then by the end, every week we were having meetings with 150 people who were all campaigning. So it was a tremendous experience from my perspective. I really enjoyed it. Until the morning of the 19th of September. I didn't like that very much at all.
We probably had quite different emotions that morning.
Oh, very different.
Because my journey, I was busy campaigning for a non-political thing at the time. It took about 3 years of my life. So I wasn't involved in any the stuff. I wasn't involved in any rallies or anything like that. If there was another referendum tomorrow, that might be different though. So I was a bystander, but keen observer. Now I thought that the yes vote was going to win. Now, I can't remember the polls at the time having an influence on me. I can't even remember what the polls were saying. But I was probably guilty of reading badges and window stickers and Facebook posts and social media in general, where it seemed that the whole drive was in the direction of yes. But then I remember I stayed up, watched the results come in, and even though I think the first 3 or 4 that came in were for yes from memory, but whatever they came in, they should have been 70%, but they were at 55 or 60. And I thought, well, hold on a minute. They're not getting in the areas that they need to win the big ones when they're coming in. But it was very, very, very late. And I probably went to my bed earlier if it was going the way I thought it was going to go. But I was watching the results and going, no, that doesn't make sense. Yeah. That's not a clear victory in that area. So I take it you were doing the same, but your emotions were going north to south. Mine were going south to north.
Well, it was an extraordinary evening. It was the weirdest count I've ever been at, because we had, I think it was 2 or 3 complete lights out. I think we were out of the building on one occasion as well. It was a strange goings on, and and there's a whole lot of conspiracy theories in the background. The fact is that the result is the result that we got, and there's I think now a decade later, I'm less concerned about that and more concerned about the time lost by the Sturgeonites since then, who've just not done anything, And I think that they have riled everybody. So they've riled people like me who want to see progress on an independence campaign, not bleating about it, and it's riled people who support the union because they feel that we've had that discussion, it's time to move on. And I don't think anybody's really had an ability to move on, because instead of actually doing a campaign and having a date and a focus for us all to move things forward, we've just had a whole lot of noise. And as you say, let's not do our job particularly well and blame Westminster. And that's just that's got under the skin of, I think, everybody.
I've got a cousin who was very active with the Yes campaign, a lot of stuff that was going on in George Square. He was in the organisational side of it. He was very reluctant to hold a microphone, but he was doing a lot of the other stuff. And I remember waking up eventually, because I went to bed quite late that morning, and it was about lunchtime. And I wrote a wee piece on my own Facebook page, and I said, that's it done now. And see the Scotland I want. People like my cousin can be involved in it and just accept this book of rules and make Scotland as good as possible with this book of rules. Yeah. But that didn't happen. And I'll tell you, one of my saddest aspects of the result is probably actually the thing that holds a lot of people jumping over the line. If that result had went the way I thought it was going to go, and that was a yes victory, that would have been the last referendum we had. Because it was a no, it's, well, can we have another one? Or can we look at other ways of getting independence? Now, if the vote had went yes, there was no second chance for the Unionist and no voters, because we would have been independent. And that would have been it. Now, perversely, the more I think about it, I think it's unfair, because my own opinion on it is, just have the Union. Yeah. But perversely, I think that might be one of the reasons that a lot of people can't jump over that line. Because once we step a foot over that line, that's it. The status quo is not an option anymore. Yeah. And it's definite. And I think that takes a lot of commitment. And I think that's why the responsibility, see, folk go, but the Yes campaign, the No campaign said this, and the No campaign, well, right, but it's not the No campaign's job to convince folk to move away from the status quo. The status quo is the easiest option to argue, because we know what it is. We may not like it, it may not be perfect, but we know what it is. So if you want to flip that, it's actually, that argument has got to be stronger and better than the argument of doing nothing, because doing nothing is safer to many folk. And as I said, my whole mind's changed on this, where I think it's unfair that if we ever get the vote goes the direction of yes, then that's it, it's over. There is no referendums. But as Unionists term it, the never-endums will keep going until we get to a point where it could take 20 years, it could take 5 years, it could take 50 years, I don't know. But a point where it is 51%, and that's it, bang. We don't have any more never-endums. But I genuinely knew that, I consider it, that is maybe a reason why it's stopping. See this middle ground that I keep talking about, the kingmakers? It's stopping them throwing their cards into the Yes campaign.
Well, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why people, won't shift over or consider shifting over. First of all, there's no campaign to help them, to inform them, so that's clearly a problem. But there's also, there's this barrier, and I get it. I mean, if I say anything about the SNP, I get accused of being a unionist, and and so there's this negative part to it that's really difficult. I mean, my kind of take on it is pretty straightforward. Democracy is about progress and change. And when there's an appetite for change, democracy demands that has a mechanism to be considered. And that principle can never go away. So you can't stop people from desiring change or being able to express it. And as long as that appetite persists, then there'll be a need to have a democratic means for them to express it. So that's just a matter of fact. The reason that it's become a bit of tension there is because the appetite for change is still there, and change didn't win. Whereas if you look at the Brexit vote, for example, a lot of the parties who were pro-Remain have now adopted an acceptance of the result. And that was a much tighter margin. That was 52-48 across the UK, despite the completely different picture in Scotland, 62-38. So because change won in Brexit, because that appetite for change won, then people who wanted the change have been satiated. And that's a different, got a different dynamic to just voting for the status quo. Because I can tell you one thing right now, if you think for a moment that Nigel Farage would have given up pushing for Brexit if Leave hadn't won, then I have no confidence in that. And I've met Nigel a few times, and I'm pretty confident he would have kept pushing. But then there's also the result has changed the whole political landscape. So our position in ALBA is not to go back into the EU. We favour a position in EFTA because EFTA would protect our farming, fisheries, and energy sovereignty. So it changes the way you view the world.
What disappointed me about the whole Brexit thing, from where I was sitting, it was a messy affair, but it wasn't as messy as the Scottish referendum. That was more. But I didn't enjoy that whole process as a member of the public. I thought it was horrific. Everything we had to.
I thought it was a really poorly informed debate.
Yeah, well, and do you know, to me, it was the first time I came across this demand by others to know how you ticked a ballot in a ballot box. Whereas before, my vote was quite a personal thing. Mm-hmm. Now, I might have done my voting when I was married at the time, go back, your wife say, how did you vote? I voted whatever. How did you? And that would be it, or a couple of guys at work. But from that referendum, everybody had demanded how you were voting. And ever since then, it's, well, you're a Tory, or you're this, or you're that. And I'm like, to me, for my politics, it's easy for me to ask people to tactically vote. Yeah. Because I've voted Labour, Tory, Liberal, Democrat in the past for various different reasons. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, it's because I felt whoever had that rosette on could do a good job for me in either Westminster or Holyrood. But what I found disappointing about Brexit was the public voted. Now, the whole Scottish thing is a separate argument. I understand that, right? But let's just take what happened in Brexit. The Westminster Parliament was tasked of accepting that vote, the result of that vote. But what we seen next was a bun fight. And it was as if the people who didn't want Brexit just wanted to argue for a shite Brexit, right? And it got to the point where I'm going, and I tell you, one of the most disappointing ones was SNP, because SNP told us, well, we're talking for Scotland, and Scotland didn't want Brexit. Then we came up for a vote for, was it a trade deal? And they abstained. Now, the vote only failed by about 7 votes, or 8 votes, whatever it was, and SNP abstained. So if they were that determined to have a good relationship with Europe, vote on that thing, and we'd had a better relationship than none. So it's that was very hypocritical. I mean, it pointed out that people were doing their damnedest to not have a nice, comfortable Brexit. The ones that didn't want Brexit, and I think if you took a straw poll of politicians at the time, it would have probably been to remain, right? Mm-hmm. But when the vote came, so we were asking the majority of people in the House of Parliament to do the best for us as a British electorate. Yeah. And we were asking a bunch of people that didn't agree with us. And I thought, no, your job is not to have your politics in this. The people have already decided. Your job is to get as clean a Brexit and as fair a Brexit as possible. And I didn't see that. Now, were you in the House at the time?
No, I wasn't.
It was before you went down?
Yeah, I mean, it was an absolute boorah, the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, that kind of happens on lots of different policy areas. And it goes back to that, the political point scoring stuff. And I guess that's probably one of the big problems with first past the post is that you don't get any sense of consensus. So, and the big lesson for me in this Parliament has been, because of, one of my main issues of campaigning has been defending women's rights and consequently child protection and LGBT rights from the March of Queer Theory, which is, I think, is probably one of the most authoritarian and oppressive ideologies going. It gets its fingers into every part of society. So I've been pushing back against that. And as a consequence, I've had to work with allies in every political party, the Labour Party, SNP, and the Conservatives, also some Lib Dems, but not in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, and with, Conservative peers. So I've worked across all different political parties, and Greens as well, actually, during this Parliament. And that's been great because we had that focus on something that's really important to us. We've actually realised that there's a lot of things we can, work around in each other's politics. So, I'll not name and shame them, but there's a few Tory MPs have said to me, look, we got our Brexit. I don't see why you can't have a vote on independence. So, I mean, there's sympathy there and there's commonality and a better understanding. That's only been possible because probably because I'm a smaller party now as well. We've broken down some of those combative barriers between the political parties. But, it's still very much a feature there. And it's a false argument. I mean, the Labour Party will vote against Tory policy because the Tories won't be flexible about some of the nuances in their policy. And so you just set up that persistent rivalry. It's not helpful. It's really not helpful. I mean, I'll get it in the neck for speaking to a unionist.
Listen, I'll get the same. I'll lose some people, subscribers and stuff, but I don't get that.
But I mean,
it's more important.
But going back to that fundamental point, is it not better? I mean, I think our relationships developed two reasons. One, I did broad scanning on political views. So I like to hear views from people who maybe don't agree with me, but I need to know where they're coming from. So that's one thing. And secondly, because I follow what's happening on the gender beat, I pick stuff up through those links as well. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to start having a conversation about how we make Scotland better, because we've got to do that anyway, and that will service the interests of all of us, and there are real challenges there. And I think for people in the movement for independence, they have to accept there are things that we could be doing that could be done a lot better. But there's also, I guess, part of the unionist movement that need to accept that the union is not working perfectly, and that there are fundamental challenges and changes that need to happen there. Now, those are conversations that I believe we could have without having a barney about the Constitution. But that constitutional question won't go away as long as an appetite for change exists.
No, I mean, I was in a space, I think it was the one you were on, and once you left, and Basil that was running the space, he's very much a unionist, and he was saying, I was look, my desire is to bankrupt them, get them to pot. There is no SNP, or if there's an SNP, it's such an insignificant thing that it doesn't interfere with the big boy politics, and Scotland can improve. And his theory was, well, no, I would rather there was just no talk of independence at all.
Yeah,
and I was like,
I remember that conversation.
Were you still in the room at that point?
Well, he chatted to me about that. I think there was a couple of guys said that you should ban nationalism, basically.
Aye, and I was like, no. And I think there was a few people about a wee bit, you're like, what? Craig's saying that? Because that's like somebody telling me that I should have no opinion as a unionist. Yeah. And that's no, that's to me, it's very Eastern Bloc communism, where and Stalin is. And that's not the Scotland I want. I want a Scotland where everybody's allowed their opinion, but we don't need to hate each other because of it. And that's the Scotland I've seen the last 10 years. And it becomes, somebody puts up an opinion, if you didn't know their politics, it's as if people have a wee kick at the rosette first before they agree with them or not. Yeah. And that's, to me, is bonkers. If you agree with, I agree with you on a lot of things, you know that. And that's the most important. So I can agree with you on that. But a lot of people, and probably in politics as well, as soon as somebody says something, they're judging the rosette rather than what they're putting on the table, and they feel that, well, I'm blue and he's red, so I should automatically default be opposed to that, and it's no healthy. And I think I would love Holyrood. I think Holyrood is the best and easiest place to get a fix because it's no first past the post. And I would love this one coming hopefully sooner than 2 years, because this one, I think, my opinion, has got to bid the SNP. We can then hopefully get a coalition type minority government in place and give everybody 5 years to sort their shit out. And that is the people that are there sorting out Scotland, and then the smaller, newer parties and independents getting themselves lined up for the next one, whereby we hopefully have another massive, big, different spread of people. And I think that would be great. And then the conversation goes in whatever direction it does on all things. But we've not got this party that became so blasé. It was as if it was like genuinely being in communist. I'm not talking about the politics as much here, just the actual whole thing, like a single party state almost, where everybody was to toe the line and everybody was to do this, and then you would see some wee clinks of, maybe Ewan would get flung out and barred because he, disagreed with something, and then Katie Forbes looked as if she was going to be a wee bit of a shining light, but unfortunately she's joined the That's Telling Lies now. I thought she could have been, but just get rid of them, get some adults in the place, and then 5 years after that, get a more welcome spread. There's the STP, who I thought had died 30 years ago, but there's, Basil and all that, there's a resurgence in that party. There's a lot of new parties. You've got the Scottish Family Party and all these. If they had a couple of seats and a voice in their Holyrood, I wouldn't be opposed to that in a coalition or a minority government. I would prefer that. But
in terms of imposing, or ruling out a particular political view, I think look at Andrew Doyle's book, Free Speech and Why It Matters. Really good wee book. He makes a really important argument in there, which is if you ban something that you oppose, then you have to expect that one day your views will be banned because there's always someone who will oppose them. So the example I would use about banning nationalism is, can you imagine, and there's very real chance with a Labour administration coming in, that it will be unlawful to hold gender critical views. It will be unlawful to believe in biological reality. And because we know in Germany, you can get I think it's a €10,000 fine for misgendering someone. And these are real issues. So if you're saying that material reality is against the law, that's the same kind of thing as banning, another type of political view. And I think we do ourselves a massive disservice if we limit speech in or political thought in any shape or form. We've got to be courteous and courageous enough to have political discourse without any, animosity and anger. Hot tempers I can deal with. I don't mind opposition. I don't mind strong argument. But when you get beyond that and you start to control thinking and speech, it's...
But this is where I'm at with this whole gender thing. I find the whole topic scary. And until recently, because I'm a 51-year-old white heterosexual, I felt it wasn't my place. And I was scared of it. I wasn't educated enough on it, which has changed over the last couple of months. But I felt it didn't matter what I say, I was going to get flung back on me. And I was foolishly, because that's the way I was meant to think about it by the PR machine. When you see LGB and then all these other letters in the alphabet, I just thought it was all the one same thing, because I've lived through the evolution of the rainbow flag and I understood what that meant. That was the lesbian, gay and bi community wanting to have the same rights very much as I had in a heterosexual relationship. Now I look at that in common sense and think, well, that makes sense. I understand that. So, and then, I've seen that campaign through my life, and then they started adding on more and more colours and shapes, and now we've got these circles. I don't have a bloody clue what these things are. And it's only recently that I've understood, and I think I'm at the end of my quest of knowledge on it, to why that happened. And I've got my campaigning before was always follow the money. And I couldn't understand where the financial benefit was to this thing. But I think I found it. And it's so completely obvious that the people who helped get the result for the original rainbow flag and LGB, they needed another fight. Because that fight, I'm not suggesting for a minute it's over and I'm not the person that should judge it. But when I talk to people in the lesbian and gay community over the last 2 months, they're like, I'm quite cool with where I'm at now. Society's a lot better place than it was in the 80s. Yes. And the things that we maybe want changing are not life-threatening. I know, we've got the big battles where those things. So the people who are driving those battles, when they don't have those battles anymore, they need to find others. And I couldn't believe it when I realised there was a split. Not maybe as obvious, but there's a definite split there with people who've done the LGB campaigning and members of that community that think, go and do your own thing.
Exactly.
But here's where I am in the whole thing, and it's quite similar to race, ethnicity, religion, all these things. And it's quite a simple, again, common sense and logic. I think any minority, if they're having their rights affected or the perception of their rights being affected, then they have to be listened to. But see, to give you what you want, if that is going to be detrimental to the majority, then we need to sit down and a talk about it. We can't just go, oh, there's a minority needing something, whatever it is, whether that's religious or ethnic or gender, sex, whatever it is. You go, well, there's a minority who came to us with a problem with society, and they said, look, we think this is unfair, and we could do with this to make your life better. And if we can go, well, we can sort that without affecting anybody else, then bugger it to do it. But when it's 51% of people in Scotland, I think, are female, and when we try to put laws in place for the minority, and it's not even the LGBTQ plus community, it's a wee totty bit at the end, so we're talking about under half of 1% probably, can affect 51% of the population. Oh, stop.
Well, I mean, it affects 100% of the population, because if you limit freedom of thought and freedom of belief and freedom of expression, then everybody's impacted. You know, I mean, I'm obviously not a woman.
You sure?
So,
excuse me, can I just clarify? This might help your polling, right? Have we found a politician that knows the difference in the definition?
Oh, aye.
Thanks.
Oh, completely. Adult human female.
Right, we're cool with that. We're there.
That's it, nothing more. So, yeah, I mean, it affects everybody. And that's the thing. So there's a measure in moral philosophy about equality, which is equals should be treated equally and unequals should be treated unequally. And that means that, you know, if we are all equal, then we get the same treatment. If we have something that a characteristic that differentiates us, then that should be considered, but it shouldn't make us receive more benefit or less benefit, but should be accommodated. It's all about accommodating difference. And so what you can't do when you're trying to balance rights, if you're trying to do it genuinely, is amplify the rights of one group to the disadvantage of another group, because that is not equality. And that is where we are. So, and that's why I refuse to be silenced on this issue. I think it's of fundamental importance, and I, you know, I'm very clear that women's rights and protections are absolutely central to my politics. And it's not just because it's a hobby horse just now. I've campaigned with women for years. I campaigned with women back in the day when AIDS was an issue. I worked with them. I volunteered with them. I've, you know, had links into with people who are involved in women's aid and all that going back decades. So I'm very comfortable supporting women's rights. I stand with them. I never speak for them, but I will defend their right to protect their privacy and intimate spaces. You know.
Well, where I'm, and I've said this before, and I always put this in before I actually make the comment, that I understand what I'm about to say could be termed as misogynistic and all that carry on. But I believe that, and it's just through the process of genetics and through millennium of evolution, that women should be protected. Now, when we say that as a man, some people, you don't need to, I know that, right? But I think it's just the way I'm programmed through all these things that, you know, if somebody was, I'm not saying it wouldn't happen, but if somebody was threatening behaviour towards my son and my daughter, I would probably be more protective of my daughter, right? I think that's just the way I'm programmed. I don't believe that's misogynistic, but I understand why some people would say that. So when you see these things and you go, hold on a minute, that's blatantly wrong. Yeah. What you're advocating is a guy with a penis dressed like a woman should be able to go in and urinate in the same privacy as my daughter. No, I can't handle that. And you know, the one that really frightened me was a case with the Edinburgh Rape Centre. And I have got close dealings with similar. When you were down in London, I was down in London at the same time, came home about 2009, and I was a sales director for an industrial cleaning company. We'd done a lot of work in the sort of third sector. And we had this customer who had all these safe places for women. So there was protocols, there was things that we had to be aware of if we were getting into certain areas. And we have the CEO, an active member of staff in Edinburgh's Rape Centre, who's a man, and got a job. And nobody thinks, well, nobody involved in that thing think that it's a problem. And I think, well, hold on a minute. Rape must be, to me, rape and any sexual abuse, whether it's to a woman, a child, or a man, must be one of the hardest crimes to report. Because the only harder crime to report is probably somebody killing you, and you ain't going to tell the police about that if you're the victim. And it's the same with this hate crime. We made it easier for people to go and give a hate crime report than a woman who's been raped. That I'm sure when they go into the police station, once they get through that door, they get a good level of support, I would hope. But it's still a tough move. And in society, we said we're going to make it easier for somebody to report some bad words that maybe upset them than somebody in the most horrific crime that you could have as a victim to report. And now we go, right, so you're through that door, and if you're unlucky enough to be raped in Edinburgh and you get sent to this place for support, you could be dealt with a man.
And be told that, no, it's a woman. And the victim, the victim is, who's experienced sexual assault, can see a man, and the people who are supposed to support her will tell her, no, it's a woman and you're a bigot. Yeah.
That you've been raped. You've just been raped.
Just been raped.
Yeah, you're a bigot.
Or even you've continued to have trauma because of that. And that is the message that we're given. I mean, that was possible. The fact that a man without a GRC was hired to a job that was supposed to be only available to female applicants. That happened because the Scottish Government at that time, under Nicola Sturgeon, had made it clear to those types of organisations that funding would be contingent on a trans-inclusive policy. So that's the genesis of how that all happened. And we can't walk away from that. The consequences of Nicola Sturgeon's adherence to queer theory policies is really problematic and continues to be so. It's really deeply concerning.
Unbelievable. Well, just to finish off, because I'm conscious that you're in the middle of a campaign and you maybe want to be chatting doors and getting folk to vote. But as I say to all my guests, Neale, the biggest gift you can give someone is your time, and you've given me plenty of that, not just in this conversation today that we've recorded, but in the lead up to this as well. So I can't thank enough for that. And I do genuinely wish you all the best in your campaign, which might not be many unionists to tell you that. But if we're going to get what I believe is the reason behind voting for Westminster is a candidate going down to represent your constituents in Westminster, then you seem like quite a good one for me. So I wish you all the best with that. Thanks very much for your time. Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. Anything you want to finish off with saying?
No, well, I mean, look, I think this has been a really interesting chat, and I think it's a necessary chat. I think, as a country, whatever your perspective on the constitutional future, we should all still be friends and neighbours. And there's a lot more. I'll finish off with this. This will go down well in SNP circles. As a won't.
That's a headline coming up.
Go down. So, if you told me in 2014 that in 10 years' time I would have more respect for Joanne Lamont than I do for Nicola Sturgeon, I wouldn't have believed you. But that is an absolute fact. That's an absolute fact.
Incredible, isn't it? Well, thanks very much for your time. So, folks, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. I've certainly enjoyed it. And if you have enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing. But as I say, at the end of all my videos, and I'll tailor it down a wee bit because of the company. Make sure the SNP or any of the remaining cult members, everyone else, have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.